Hello, everyone, and welcome to Modcast episode 14. Joining me, as always, is Kris. Hello, Kris.
How you doing?
Finished watching basketball, Kris? That's good.
Yes, I did.
Okay, cool.
The Seattle Storm won, in case anybody cares.
Awesome. And joining us today is one of the mod makers for the huge, epic mod that can only be beyond Skyrim, Bruma, Lasur Arkinshade. Welcome.
Hello. Hello.
How do you pronounce that?
You see, I don't really have any moral right to tell people because I just pulled it out of a random name generator from an MMO that I played like 5 years ago.
How would you pronounce it?
In my head, it's Lasur Arkinshade, but I've given up on trying to dictate that to people.
I prefer laser myself. It's just the pew pew kind.
Most people do, yeah.
Really, because it sounds like some sort of space hero, like Lasur Arkinshade. You know, I thought that might be a kind of like a space hero, like a space quest protagonist. That's what it sounds like to me. And I thought there was a whole story behind it. It turns out,
no,
it's a robot behind it all. Shame. So would you rather just call it Laser or Linton or?
Linton's fine, whatever.
I like how he just ignored your pronunciation, went straight to laser or Linton.
So I think the first thing people want to know, is how you managed to get involved with Beyond Skyrim. Where did it come from? How did it just sort of? I'm sure these things always just organically just appear. You know, oh, let's do Cyrodiil in the fourth era, or let's do Morrowind, or let's create. You know, but how did you manage to find yourself there? How did you manage to make the thing its reality, as it were?
Well, I didn't. The team existed. The Cyrodiil team existed before I joined. I joined. I'll resist the urge to give you like a sort of like a bullet point history lesson, but basically, in like within like days of Skyrim releasing, I think it might have even been a couple of days before Skyrim came out, there was a forum thread on the Bethesda forums about creating a Beyond Skyrim project, creating something to add the other provinces of Tamriel to the game, like a Tamriel rebuilt for Morrowind, but for Skyrim. And way before my time, there was a team making Hammerfell under that umbrella. And a couple of the people who were on the Hammerfell project at the time had this idea to work on Cyrodiil instead. And to use a lot of and to basically release Bruma as like an early teaser for the wider project, because obviously Bruma is a pretty snowy, Skyrim-y kind of region, so you can front load it a bit because you don't have to have as many unique like trees and floor assets and things like that. So the Bruma idea, the idea of making a pre-release for Cyrodiil, I kind of got in on that. Probably I'd say 4 or 5 months after after they'd actually commenced work on it. And I actually saw, I originally heard about Beyond Skyrim, and I want to say mid 2013, there was this Game Informer article about Beyond Skyrim, and they had this really shitty screenshot of like an early work in progress version of Bruma. And I'd just been replaying Oblivion at the time, so like my nostalgia for Cyrodiil was really fresh. And it was like a really low, undetailed, like flat terrain with like the Bruma stable and like the city walls. But something about it just really set my imagination running wild. So I made the fateful decision to apply on the forums and see if I could get in, and it turned out that they saw something in me clearly, and I was given a chance. And
So what was the application process like? Were you, because you're the lead writer and the casting director, I believe, for Beyond Skyrim?
Yes.
So what was did you have to submit a writing sample or things of that nature?
Yeah, what happened was the project lead, the sole project lead at the time, who's now one of the 2 project leads, a guy called Rich, he basically said, okay, I want you to write up for me like a paper design of a sample quest. And I want, and his specific instructions, which I think were pretty, there was a lot of wisdom in them, and I think it kind of goes to the heart of one of the philosophies that we have on the project now to this day, was I want you to show that you can work within scope. I don't want you to come up with some sort of ridiculous, epic, impractical novel of a quest. I just want you to come up with a fairly simple quest with a lot of roleplay opportunity, a lot of choices, but that's done in a way that isn't unnecessarily burdensome to actually create. And so I wrote it up, and he liked it. Although honestly, the way that I ended up actually becoming the writing director was pure luck. A couple of months after when I joined originally, Rich was basically micromanaging every department himself. We didn't really have directors for individual things. There was no art director, there was no writing director. But he made the decision to do that, to get a bit of the to minimize the amount of sort of
delegate,
bureaucracy.
more or less.
Yeah. And I just so happened to be the most active writer at the time, so I kind of walked into that out of complete luck. But hopefully it's worked out so far. I guess the people who've played Bruma will have to be the judge of that one.
I mean, yeah, you've written all these articles. You've written about 3 articles, which we found somehow, of a blog of you sort of detailing your quest creating process of Bruma. What I'm kind of interested in is, obviously, it's set a while after exposing my bad Elder Scrolls lore there. A while after Oblivion, I know that at least, and obviously everything, the nature of the world has changed. So, how did you feel? How did you come up with kind of creating that world to begin with? And when did you feel like that was your, that was looking like your responsibility? If you know what I mean.
Well, to some extent, we kind of we're kind of following the lead that Bethesda set, right? When you play Skyrim, and if you read the in-game books in Skyrim, some of them, or even the novels that were put out in between Oblivion and Skyrim, there's a tone, right, that they're kind of going for. This kind of the Empire's on its last legs. It's kind of this fallen glory thing. But obviously, with Skyrim, all of that is kind of wrapped up in this sort of Nordic hero fantasy where you're this guy with a horned helmet killing dragons and saving the world. So for us, the goal is to give people a sense of the kind of the horror of the war that took place in between the 2 games, and the kind of the scars that remain, because the Great War, which took place between Oblivion and Skyrim, was largely the Aldmeri Dominion invading Cyrodiil and trying to lay claim to the Empire itself. So the majority of the battle scars were sustained by the people of Cyrodiil and the Imperials. So it's just everything it's about trying to set a tone, really. We decided the tone, and we kind of went from there, and everything else it's just about trying to kind of serve the tone. We fill in the blanks where necessary, and there are a lot of blanks, because in terms of the actual specifics of what took place in Cyrodiil between Oblivion and Skyrim, we don't have very much to go on. We have a few events from the novels, and then we have a couple of lore books that have some very vague descriptions of skirmishes that took place during the war and things like that. But everything else, it's about looking at Oblivion, to a lesser extent looking at ESO, and other general kind of canon sources, and then just kind of filling in the blanks with our own lore, and trying to kind of pick to some extent as well, we want to kind of reflect our own direction for the universe, because there are some things that we think Oblivion didn't necessarily portray quite as well as we would have wanted, and so it's trying to kind of find a healthy middle ground between our own vision and trying to remain consistent with what Bethesda have said.
What would be those things that Oblivion didn't portray?
Well, properly? In the lore, there's supposed to be this divide between the Imperials into the kind of warlike and hardy Colovians, in Anvil and Kvatch and those kind of regions, and then the kind of more decadent and politically dominant Nibonese in the east. And Oblivion didn't really pay that off in any way. There are some kind of vague references to it, but everyone wore the same clothing across the province in Oblivion. Everyone kind of talked the same. It felt a bit homogenized. And don't get me wrong, I entirely understand why that probably happened. Bethesda no game studio has infinite resources, and they have to kind of choose their
Mhm.
battles. But we try to figure out little ways of trying to, pay homage to those kind of things that Bethesda didn't necessarily get around to showing. So, like, for example, we made the decision fairly early on that we would separate the clothing between Colovian and Ibonese, and just try to kind of reference those sort of differences more in quests and things like that. Yeah, it's nothing that drastic, but
Have you sort of laid out those differences in the dialogue and generally the sort of tone and feel, so to like people sort of use that as a kind of pejoratives or profanity, or are those differences kind of
yeah, there's
bordered
more.
out and things?
There is more of that. Yeah, there isn't so much of it in Bruma, just because Bruma is it's in this weird position where it's kind of half Imperial and half Nordic. So there's it kind of the Nordic influences kind of blur the sort of the imperial culture that exists there. But it is something that we have been doing a lot more of. Because obviously Bruma's out now, so we've been doing a lot more active development of all the other cities, and we've been
Yeah, there was that bard with the hat, right?
yes, he was the biggest selling point of Bruma by far. Yeah.
Did you start with the idea of releasing the whole of Cyrodiil, or did you intend to sort of cordon it off that way? Was there like a technical limit down the line where you're like, oh, this is developed, so we'll try and release this as one part, or was that a plan from the start, or was it just like you felt towards the end, you're like, oh, this part isn't developed, but this part is very developed, so we'll release this as its own thing?
We by the time I joined, the plan was to release Bruma early, because we were very. I say we, Rich and Marcus and the people who were kind of the sort of early progenitors of the Cyrodiil project as it exists today. They were very conscious of the fact that there is a. I mean, let's just be honest, right? A lot of projects along these lines are vaporware, right? And
Well,
they don't
absolutely,
ever
yeah.
go anywhere. And there is we felt that it was very important that we kind of we have some sort of early release that can serve as a kind of like a statement of intent, but also kind of a proof of competence, like a proof that we're not just some wide-eyed teenagers in a basement somewhere discussing lore and throwing ideas around, but that we have what it takes to actually make content that sees the light of day.
Wow, false
Although
scar slight there.
Oh no, I have Falsco is actually one of the biggest inspirations behind releasing Bruma early in the state that in the way that we did, because originally, like, the very early idea for Bruma was it wasn't Beyond Skyrim Bruma, it was the Bruma beta, and it was going to be it was going to be Bruma in the same sort of vague region, but we weren't going to wait until it was actually in like a polished, presentable state to release it. We were just going to release it in like an in development state as kind of a, hey, we're doing stuff, this is what we're working on kind of thing. But when I saw kind of all the hype that Falskar had been generating, and I realized that there was this kind of appetite, even if it's not a full province's worth of content, just as something that feels like it, that it fits in with the game and that it's this kind of polished, unofficial expansion kind of deal. I kind of pushed very heavily for us to, to actually fully voice and to finish it before we released it, which may have contributed in no small part to the fact that it didn't come out in summer 2014 as we originally announced. But Bruma was a massive. That is the other reason that we decided to release Bruma early. Incidentally, when we started and back when we were foolish enough to announce the summer 2014 thing, we were new to this. It's not like we were some sort of professional game developers or even like modding veterans that all knew exactly what we were doing and how this was going to play out. We at that point we really had a lot to learn, and Bruma was a massive cliff face of a learning curve for us. In many ways Bruma was kind of a testing ground to see what worked and what didn't, so that we could refine our workflows and figure out how to actually how to work more efficiently and to deliver better content in the end. So
So the next one is going to come out sooner than 3 years, right?
well, I can only speak for Cyrodiil, obviously, and for us, I put it this way: our very explicit and aggressive intention is to release comfortably in advance of the Elder Scrolls 6, whenever the Elder Scrolls 6 releases.
Oh yeah,
so
you got time for that.
Yeah, well, well, there are
2022 is what you're saying.
no comment, but I'm optimistic. I'll put it that way. I'm optimistic.
Well, you do know that the Elder Scrolls 6 was basically, they came up with it on the day. They just generated a height map, put an E and B over it, and said, it's coming. And then when they sort of interviewed Todd, it's like, oh, you're starting work in this, right? And he was like, oh, we're pre-production. Just like,
oh no, yeah.
They came up in the morning.
I do not expect the Elder Scrolls 6 for a while yet. Admittedly, I have kind of a perverse incentive for it not to come out all that soon, which is weird because I know most Elder Scrolls fans and Bethesda fans and video game fans are chomping at the bit for the Elder Scrolls 6. But yeah, take all the time you need, Bethesda, really.
Well, even if you don't release another piece of content, just the fact that you've released Bruma is something like to be applauded, because like you were saying, very few teams actually do release these large, huge mods, and they do become vaporware. So why do you think you guys were successful in releasing Beyond Skyrim Bruma and will be successful with like your later editions? Because I do see like there's like 7 or 8 trailers for like all kinds of provinces all across Tamriel. So. Well,
before I answer the question, I should just make it abundantly clear that Beyond Skyrim is like it's an umbrella project that contains different
teams.
It's
like Creative Commons. It's just a name everyone can use.
So I'm on the Cyrodiil team, which did Bruma and is working on the rest of Cyrodiil. So
in other words, don't blame me if some other guy doesn't do his job. We're coming out with Cyrodiil, sure.
Yes, but also I don't want people to have the impression that like we just kind of one day decide, hey, we're going to do something on High Rock today, and then the next day I'm like, I feel like working on Cyrodiil now.
Yeah,
we're not. But to answer your question, I think it's very easy for a mod author, and especially when you're in a large mod team that's working on something on a large scale and of a large scope, and especially when it's something that sounds almost as fantastical as, we're going to add this region that was so large that it was the setting of an entire previous Elder Scrolls game. It is very easy to fall into the trap of thinking like a fan and not thinking like a developer. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to get caught up in ideas and in your kind of personal wish list and things that you really want to do, and lose sight of the things that you really have to do. And it's very easy to use the fact that you don't have a boss, and you don't have a boss that you're dependent on for money to live, and the fact that you don't have like formal deadlines or a board of directors that you're answering to.
Well, is this what you're talking about? Because I was noticing when watching a playthrough of Beyond Skyrim, I was watching you sort of wandering around Bruma, and I was just thinking to myself, oh, it'd be so easy for the people making this to put a reference in there, or a reference there, or a reference there. And I was kind of admiring the fact that you had discipline to sort of give the place its own identity, rather than for the guards to do a kind of joke from Oblivion, or you know what I mean? So I was like, is that what you kind of mean, or?
Yeah, it's that, but it's also just like knowing when to stop, right? And it's like settling on, okay, we're going to have these quest lines, we're going to have these cities, we're going to have roughly this amount of content in every village, every town, every city, so that it's just about having the discipline to stay focused on actually releasing, right? And it's just about being willing to kill your babies if necessary. And you've just got to start thinking. In a lot of professional AAA studios, right, you'll have like a piece of content that you really love and that you're working on, and then you hear stories like this all the time, and then like your boss comes up to you and you have to cut it because of a release deadline or whatever. I mean, there's plenty of that in Skyrim, right, like the Civil War questline and stuff. And when you're working on a mod team like this, not only do you need to kind of have the people at the top the department directors and the team leads be willing to kind of lay down the law when necessary and kind of cut things, but also you have to be willing to kind of cut things yourself, and you've got to. It's just about keeping. How to phrase this correctly?
You just got to keep it in digestible bits, I guess, so that the work gets done, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to overwhelm yourself with something too grand. So is there an example of a quest that you kind of had an idea for, but then at the end you kind of had to think, okay, this is too much, we're not going to be able to release if I keep going with this, and that you had to sort of whittle down to make it feasible?
Oh, yeah. Well, with Bruma, we had a lot of stuff got cut while it was still on paper, right? Because we do with quests in Cyrodiil, we do like, I say paper design, but it's Google Docs. But we do paper design of the quests.
Virtual paper.
Yes, pixel paper. We do paper design before we actually start implementing stuff in the creation kit, and a lot of the stuff kind of got whittled down and cut if necessary in that period before it got implemented. What did happen though is we had. In kind of the final few months of Bruma's development, and especially after we announced the release date, we went into like a massive crunch period, and we were still recording voice acting at that point, and we were still fixing a lot of bugs and finishing some quests even, and for various reasons, like in one case, we just had like voice actor availability problems. We couldn't cast an actor for the character in time. We had to cut a quest from the Frostfire Glade dungeon, and there was also this kind of like a soft main quest in Bruma that we threw in just because if we're releasing just a city, we wanted to at least have something to kind of fill the gap of like a main storyline, and that's the thing with the guard captain.
The whole Stormcloak Imperial thing at the start, right?
No. There's like the Bruma guard captain, and what happens is he sends you on like a series of quests. But the third, the final quest in that chain, it was meant to have like all of these scripted sequences where like the guard captain goes with you into this dungeon, and like there was going to be like a sequence where like one of the minor antagonists from an earlier quest reappears, and then there was going to be like this really emotional scene where like the guard captain kind of has almost like a nervous breakdown. But we actually had all of that fully voiced and in game, but we just couldn't. We ran out of time to get it working reliably. So I had to cut all of the scripted stuff like a week before launch, and then get the voice actor who was River Canoff I just went kind of cap in hand to him and got him to record 2 new lines to kind of bridge the gap. So it's game development is very and mod development it's very unpredictable, and
did you patch it in later?
We decided not to, just because it would be very difficult to do without breaking people's existing save games. But maybe one day, like maybe one day. Quest
on top of the quest, so that way they could load up outside of your quest you're going to change.
Yeah, well, it's I'm tempted at some point when I'm no longer working on. Like when Cyrodiil is actually released, I'm tempted to do like a couple of like semi-official, semi-third-party kind of
cut version.
I might release a couple of things as like personal mods to restore code content or whatever one day.
Is there going to be dumb question time? Is there going to be an ESL version of Beyond Skyrim?
Is there going to be an ESL version of Beyond Skyrim? No. The ESLs, I'm not 100% familiar with the format because, confession time, we still do our work in the old Skyrim creation kit, not the new one at the moment. But for a few reasons. But from what little I understand of ESLs, they're designed for like relatively small amounts of new records and new forms. And the current Cyrodiil ESM is actually so cheap that you can't load it in the creation kit without it basically breaking.
Oh, is that why you can't load it in the SSE CK or?
You can load it in the SSE CK, but you have to do the same thing that we do with that we do currently, which is we basically we take the Skyrim.esm and we strip out basically almost all of the content from it, so that when we load the Cyrodiil ESM in the creation kit, there are still enough forms left over for it not to set on fire, basically. The reason why we don't use this special edition creation kit right now is just because there are a couple of bugs in it that don't exist in the old creation kit that aren't, like, I don't think they're really all that impactful for most modders, but because we do like a lot of large scale level design in the exterior and stuff like that, just little bugs like the fact that the bounds of trees, when you select them, are like 10 times larger for some reason in special edition creation kit. So like you can't really it's a pain in the ass to try and pick up and move trees and stuff like that. But we may be migrating over to the SE creation kit at some point soon if we can figure out some kind of hacky fixes to those things. But we'll see.
I don't know. Stripping out the Skyrim ESM sounds like piracy to me. Okay. So, what do you have a favorite quest in particular that you've written for that you worked on for Bruma, or like that you enjoyed making, or that you're particularly proud of, for example?
Well, I don't know if this is normal, and I don't know. Maybe Kris has had similar experiences with his own stuff. I don't know, but I tend to hate the stuff that I make within like a few months of finishing working on it. Like if
yeah, I think that's perfectly normal for most people.
Like if I had my way, I would rework a significant chunk of the Bruma quests and the writing, because the thing with Bruma is I think the player won't realize it because they don't know what was worked on early and what was worked on late. But when I play it, because I know the stuff that I worked on very early and the stuff that I worked on very late in development, you can see a very clear progression where the quality of the content just gets better and the earlier stuff is just really weak comparatively. But I would say I really I'm quite proud of the quest with the Stormcloaks and the Imperials that I think Kris was referring to earlier. Just because it has a lot of choice and non-linearity, and a lot of ways for players to use their skills and stuff like that to influence the outcome of the quest. Incidentally, I'm a massive I have an unreasonable love for skill checks and skill-based options in RPGs, so I try to shoehorn those in as much as I can.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated how each path was completely different and there was multiple options to completing them, as opposed to if you compare that to the original base game, it's either just follow Rayloff or other guy, and it doesn't really change much regardless of which path you choose. But here it's a lot more interesting. You could talk to the Imperial Guard guy, you could pick the lock, or you could torture the prisoner, and if you say go with the Stormcloaks, you go up to the roof, and there's that really cool animation where he blows the horn, and there's just a lot of really cool stuff that just makes each path and each choice satisfying. So I really appreciated that, as opposed to like I said, the base game is just you just go one door or the other door, and it's basically the same thing.
First of all, thank you. I think I try not to be too harsh when I talk about Bethesda's quest design in Skyrim and in Fallout 4, because the thing is, I don't know if you've played Oblivion, but I feel like they actually did a better job of quest design in that game, for my taste at least. But I think what changed, or I think what guides Bethesda's quest design as of Skyrim onwards, is I don't think they necessarily view quests as like an end. I think they view them as a means to an end. I think they view them as a way to get the player to explore the world now. So they tend to have a lot more fetch quests, a lot more go to the end of this dungeon and retrieve this for me quests. And to their credit, like that, they have the design of quests as far as like the way that the order that you're likely to find the quest and the order that you're likely to be sent to different locations, down to an absolute science now. And they can, they really do kind of, in a very subtle but very deliberate way, get you exploring the world. And that's something that I really like. I don't think we're anywhere near as good as them in that regard. But I think Bethesda's focus on that kind of comes at the expense of quests with a lot of kind of discrete gameplay, a lot of interesting scenarios, a lot of
role-playing RPG.
Yeah. That's just me, though. I don't know. I spend a lot of time kind of daydreaming and thinking about like quest design theory and stuff, but it's pretty it's not very interesting conversation.
Well, you mentioned in your blog that Beyond Bruma is more closer to New Vegas's type of quest design as opposed to Bethesda's. Is that would you agree with yourself? So
no,
I think you brought up the infamous flowchart from that one quest.
Oh yeah. That flowchart is almost a meme at this point. I'm almost ashamed for bringing it up, but the goal is definitely to be close to New Vegas. I don't know. In hindsight, I don't think Bruma got as close to it as I would have liked. But I think, for me, and this may be like a really reductive way of viewing quests, and it's probably a way that a lot of people, especially a lot of just people who play video games, probably won't relate to at all. But for me, I think the true strength of a quest in terms of design, not just in terms of writing, is if you plot it out on a flowchart and you see how it branches, if at all, and if it just see how it flows. And I think one of the things that we really tried to do with Bruma was just to have a lot more opportunities for you to kind of have, meaningful dialogue sequences that aren't just an NPC telling you which dungeon to go to next, or meaningful choices that affect the end of a quest and that have some kind of payoff later on, even if it's just like a random encounter or something. That was the goal. I think there are places where we fell short. I think there are places where we hit it fairly well. But that's kind of the thing, right? Bruma was in many ways like a testing ground, like a sandbox to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. So the goal, hopefully, is that by the end, we'll all know what we're doing, and we'll be churning out content that hits those goals more reliably.
Well, yeah, you're either a success or you learn something. Like, there is no failure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I approach things.
The response to Bruma in terms of the writing of the quests, from most of what I've seen, has been actually pretty positive. I think way more positive than it should be. Like, I think, I guess it's very easy for people who weren't involved in making it to kind of look at the positives and not really notice the negatives because they didn't see the sausage being made. But I guess the public does kind of think that we're...
Yeah, well, I mean, it's natural because you're growing and you've learned something that you're going to look back and you're going to be overly critical of your old stuff. It happens to all of us, happens to mod authors, happens to actors. I get messages from actors all the time saying, I want to redo this line. Then a month later, they want to redo it again. And
God, we had that actually with Bruma. One of our, in the last patch for Bruma that's coming out pretty soon, hopefully. One of our voice actors came to me and he was like, listen, I recorded the lines for this character like when I was really new, and I don't think they're up to standard, so can I re-record them? So he re-recorded like over 100 lines. So yeah, I think it's a universal experience probably among people who create whatever it is that they create.
I can tell you're really passionate about quest design. Do you have any influences in that regard from like prominent quest designers or games in particular? That obviously you've mentioned Fallout New Vegas, but is there anything else that you kind of what you'd like to replicate or what you'd like to influence clearly your later mods or?
There are a lot of different games that influence me in different ways. I think New Vegas is one of the best games in recent years in terms of the way that quests are structured. And the way that they kind of branch and the way that they flow. I actually think Oblivion, it's a game that gets a bad rap nowadays because it's kind of, if you look at it among all the other Elder Scrolls games, it's kind of the weird Tolkien-esque knockoff game.
It's like a meme game now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But potato-faced NPCs and stuff. But the way that the quests are done in that game, they have a lot of like interesting sequences. Like there's a quest in the Imperial City where you have to like follow a guy and eavesdrop on a conversation. There's the quest where you sleep in the boat tavern and then it gets ambushed by pirates, and you wake up and you're in the middle of the sea, and you're trying to fight them off and stuff like that. So I think those two in terms of structure are my main influences, but I'm a big fan as well of like the old immersive sim games like Deus Ex, the original, and to a lesser extent the sequels, and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines as well, which is a game that I think you started to play actually. Yeah. Vampire less so for the structure and more for the kind of the Deus Ex elements, and the atmosphere as well in that game is so thick you can kind of cut it with a knife. But yeah, I think if you've played RPGs or any kind of game for long enough before you start, and you've really kind of analyzed them even slightly, you kind of end up you get influenced by them quite easily. And there are probably way more games that I've played that I wouldn't even think to mention, but that have probably subconsciously influenced me in some way. But yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of I like quests that in some way are kind of memorable and distinctive, and that don't rely on combat or on dungeon crawling exclusively as the source of the entertainment, because it's very easy to kind of just write a quest that's like basically just an arrow that sends you to go kill something or to go clear a dungeon. But at that point, you're just kind of leaving the dungeon designers and the combat designers to create the fun for you. And yeah, I don't know. I ramble a bit about this subject, but
well, I've always like when I was younger, I've always like I assumed like Bethesda would hand the next Elder Scrolls spin-off to Obsidian for some reason. I've always been kind of curious about that, despite the fact that it wasn't as simple as that sounds. So I've always kind of been curious, like, how would Obsidian do Elder Scrolls, and how would that work and stuff like that. But the more I find out, that people in Fallout New Vegas, despite the fact that it has all these great quests and memorable world building and story and things like that, is that everyone developing the game hated each other.
Oh I think New Vegas was developed in like 2 years or something like that.
It was like a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a. I can't imagine. It's a miracle that game even released, to be honest, because throwing together an open world RPG of that scale in that amount of time.
In fairness, though, they did have access to the base game that Fallout 3 was. Like they had, they didn't have to come up with the gameplay. They didn't have to come up with the assets. Well, they did make a lot of new assets, but it was almost like a mod in some ways. So they built it on the foundation of what Bethesda built.
Much like a mod, actually, there are a lot of places where you can tell that like the people who were working on it weren't like intimately familiar with the engine in the way that Bethesda are. So you just see all these like really little idiosyncrasies, like they forgot to record goodbye lines. And stuff.
The Geek Wiki has a tutorial for like quest design. Like you find this girl's teddy bear or something like that, and that quest is in New Vegas, so that's kind of unimplemented, but it's there. So you can actually see them learning. But sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, there's an NPC in the game files of New Vegas that got restored with one of those cut content mods, and it's basically like just a My First NPC that some guy at Obsidian created, who like stands on a road sign near Good Springs and like points you at a nearby village and trades gecko hides, and has a commented outline of script to play an animation that flips you the bird, which obviously was never actually going to happen. So they have it's pretty obvious that they were learning the engine while making that game. So
there's also like personal difficulties as well. I don't know if you actually heard about this, but I'm not going to go into details about it, but like the whole Chris Avellone thing that happened recently, where he basically separated from the company and then just dumped on the whole of Obsidian. Called it a Gorman-Gastian hellhole. He just like the people who wrote, like the person who wrote Veronica, and I think someone else, like didn't want to talk to the main quest designer. So it made sense that Veronica didn't actually know what the main quest was going on when you actually played with her as a companion. And then it's like he said the boss of the company was just like a sadist. Like I think he said Bethesda offered to buy Obsidian like several times, like basically since they've bought in every other company. But they've offered to buy Obsidian, but like the guy who owns Obsidian, kind of Fergus Urquhart, is just like the sadist who just like makes people go through all these loops just for his amusement and things like that. So I mean, like 1 year and a half. Admittedly, Chris says, well, it's basically an engine you can learn pretty easily, but when you're not talking to each other and hating each other, that makes it even more amazing they managed to get it out. So
Yeah, this engine. By the way, you are right. It's like the people like to kind of dump on Bethesda's engines a lot because there's a certain degree of jank in them that you don't see in other AAA games that come out. But under the hood, in terms of like content creation, the ease with which you can create quests and content in general without having to, just with like the editor, without having to constantly be going back and forth to like a programmer to like do stuff on an engine level, because obviously we don't manipulate the engine, we don't have the source code. I think there are very few engines that you would be able to make something on the scale of Beyond Skyrim, or even on the scale of interesting NPCs, or any other mod that adds a significant amount of content without access to the source code. So to some degree, it's a testament to Bethesda's technology, even if you do end up with a few buckets on people's heads and janky walk animations and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, it's a huge gateway for people. Like, you can literally create something that's kind of almost like a small DLC quality in a couple of weeks. Where
I've heard a lot of professional game developers nowadays, when people ask them like how can I get into the games industry, their advice will be work on mods. Not necessarily, you don't have to like do an Alexander key where you make a mod on your own and like heavily publicize it and land a job at Bungie, but you build up a portfolio of modding work, because it's really hard to break into the industry nowadays. A lot of the people who are in the industry today kind of just lucked out when the industry was in its infancy, and just kind of happened to land in the positions that they did. And it's a lot harder and a lot more competitive now. So there is value in heavily moddable games like Bethesda games, because in many ways they're one of the few left gateways into the industry that are left. So I don't want to sound like I'm evangelizing it too much, but
no, you're completely right. It's the learning curve with the creation kit. If I wanted to mod Dragon Age, I cannot do it because I don't know how to use the Frostbite engine. The learning curve is just too steep. And even then, they don't release any of the assets anyway. They wouldn't release a kit, but I believe CD Projekt Red did try to release a kit. Like, they tried to release the Red kit to make the Witcher 3 model. It's just the learning curve was just too steep, and they just couldn't really make anything that users could use and mod the game. So even if the developer has the intention of making their game modable, without an engine that's easy to use and easy to understand, it's pretty much impossible without like programming experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bethesda's engines are. I don't know whether this was like an original intention of theirs when they first, because I mean they've been using a variant of this engine since Marvel. I don't know whether they originally intended for it to be moddable as a goal, but I get the impression that they probably did intend for it to be. Up until recently, Bethesda was a very small company, right? For the scale of the games that they made, it was like 200 employees at most, I think.
I know. I think Morrowind had about 9.
Yeah, Morrowind was tiny. It was and to create that amount of content in a reasonable time, a relatively small team, you have to have an engine that just kind of gets out of the way and lets designers just make stuff, and lets level designers just make stuff. As quest people just make stuff. You hear there are like nightmare stories about engines that are people like the games that use those engines because they feel good, like Destiny, for example. I think, but then there was a story that came out at one point about how the developers at Bungie, like if they want to move like a resource node like a couple of centimeters, they have to boot up the editor, leave it overnight to load the level, come in the next day, hope that it hasn't crashed while loading the level, make the change, save, and then like wait an hour or so while it recompresses all the data. So
isn't it just Forge or Unreal? It's like the same Halo thing, or
no, it's I think it's a custom engine. Destiny thing. I don't. I mean, I obviously I don't. I have no first-hand experience of this at all. It's just, but yeah, it's a lot of people kind of forget that engines are about developers creating the content just as much as they are.
Well, the Halo engine is very modifiable. They just won't let you modify it. And unless you're providing multiplayer content, paying for the privilege. With Halo 5. But yeah, I mean, I've heard that with the BioWare thing. Chris mentioned it earlier, with the Frostbite engine effectively nearly killing BioWare effectively if you're not disciplined enough to handle its tremors, as it were. So, for example, Dragon Age.
The original Dragon Age was very moddable. There's companions out there. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there, and very easy to use the mod kit. So, when they switched to Frostbite, the modding was gone for Dragon Age. That was it, and that's a game that I think people would love to mod.
Oh yeah, it has a really passionate fan base. I honestly don't like. I don't want to be one of those people that gets on a podcast and says really inflammatory things, but I feel like I don't understand why you would mandate that every studio that you publish uses the same engine. It just seems bizarre to me.
Probably cost-cutting measure.
It's not cost-cutting. It's just that it's like the best engine, and EA just says, "Look, we can give you this thing for free, and we can make your game look amazing."
Plus it allows you to transfer employees to different games using the same engine.
But that didn't happen but that didn't happen with Mass Effect. Like, for example, in the same company, it didn't happen because Dragon Age Inquisition came out fine, right? It's because they just whipped the whip and managed to learn it. But Mass Effect Andromeda, they just completely lost the nerve, and that's why they just have that kind of game, because they redid it 3 times because they couldn't handle the engine. So, and that's the same company as well. So, yeah, I think your point stands, Linton. Why they just sort of point the gun at people and say use this engine and expect people just to jump on board, as it were. I mean, I even asked Mike Laidlaw about this on the stream, who's surprisingly forthcoming, and he said like that the engine just isn't equipped for RPGs, but they managed to make it work. And he said when they basically made the Dragon Age Inquisition framework, EA just dumped the whole thing, and the Mass Effect people had to start again. And they lost. So yeah. Well,
I genuinely feel really sorry for the people that were in that game. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I was gonna say, circling back to you and your mods. Since the creation kit is very easy to use and the learning curve isn't too steep, have you ever thought about making something on your own outside of Beyond Skyrim?
I have. I've daydreamed about it sometimes. Right now, while I'm working on Cyrodiil, I don't have the time. If I tried to, I would be severely neglecting other things to do so. But I've toyed with the idea of like releasing a few standard quest mods or something at some point. Can you
give us the elevator pitch of like what it would be?
No, because I haven't thought about it far enough to even come up with a concept. But I think the concept is I know how to make quests, and I know some voice actors now, so let's make a quest mod. That's about as far as I've got. But if it ever happens, I promise it will be spectacular. Truly.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about, you mentioned that Beyond Skyrim is basically, we're basically going to rename Modcast because according to you, the name is free for all. So, but I mean, in terms of what's Cyrodiil got in terms of the future and things to come, and do you interlink with other Beyond Skyrim continents, or are you just sort of in a cold war with them and basically just contradicting everything they write?
We are not in a cold war. We collaborate with the other projects on, like, for example, we share assets. So if one province has like a green aspen tree or something, we have like a central asset repository where we put all that stuff, so we're not duplicating work. So we do collaborate. But as for Cyrodiil, the plan, as it stands, is to, we've released Bruma, which was a pre-release, and now we're working on releasing the rest of it all rather piecemeal. But what that involves at the moment is basically we've just about finished implementing quests in Kvatch now, the city of Kvatch, which is pretty exciting. We're actually on the 31st of this month. We're going to start sending out the scripts to the voice actors to get that voiced, and we have art assets and level design going across the province, and we have a lot of other cities that are kind of in a state where once once writing and quest design and stuff are done in Kvatch, we can kind of move to other cities and hopefully get them going even faster. But yeah, we're just now that Bruma is, it's a lot calmer now. I think that's the biggest difference. When Bruma was in development, we had so much to prove, and we had, there was so much angst almost, because you don't know if it's actually gonna, right? You don't know if you're ever gonna release anything, and you're still learning the ropes, right? And it just caused a lot of heartache and a lot of, like we remade the Bruma architecture like 3 times, for example. There was just there were a lot of things that just had to get revised over and over again. Because we kind of just know what now. We've settled into kind of a comfortable pace. Things just kind of happen, and there's a lot less kind of conflict. There's a lot less drama. There's a lot less. We just kind of take it for granted that we all know what we're doing now, and things just kind of smoothly sail. So hopefully things will continue in that vein. Maybe as soon as this podcast drops, we'll have some sort of massive drama fest and everything will fall apart. But so far things are looking pretty positive. So
sounds good. So I mean, how do you deal with the fact that it's like Bruma's been out for more than a year now, so people have actually installed it quite happily and almost played from the game from start to finish with their characters. Like obviously it's a very complete part of it. So how do you feel you deal with that? Because obviously you can't just, here's the second part of Bruma, or here's the rest of Cyrodiil. You can't. So obviously you have to kind of build the mod on top of the other mod, as it were.
Yeah. Well, it's the secret. It's not really a secret, but the thing about Bruma is that it's like if you look at the ESM name, it's BS Heartland or ESM, and that's because it's literally it is the Cyrodiil development build as it was when Bruma was done, with like some cropping done to get rid of a lot of the unused stuff to reduce the file size, and an invisible wall put around the Bruma area to keep you in. So from a technical perspective, when Cyrodiil is done, it's essentially like imagine if Bethesda had released Skyrim in 2009 with only Whiterun playable, and then they'd released a patch in 2011 that added the rest of the game. Cyrodiil will basically be that to Bruma. It won't be a patch; it'll be its own Nexus page, it'll be its own mod, and Bruma will basically be obsoleted. But from a technical perspective, it'll basically just be a bigger ESM with more content and no more invisible walls.
But that's the thing, because people will have their saves and they'll have their characters that they're very fond of, and at the very least they spent a lot of time doing things. Would they have to uninstall their Bruma ESM to actually install the next ESM, and wouldn't that affect the save?
They would have to overwrite it with the new one, but from it shouldn't break. The goal is to support Bruma saves, so that everything will work smoothly out of the box. Now, there is a slight risk that things may come up, and by things I just mean, like, say if we decide in the full release of Cyrodiil that one of the Bruma quests to have like a payoff somewhere else, but we didn't think of that in Bruma, so there's no like easy flag that we can check. There isn't like a variable or anything. Then it may be possible that some of that may slightly break on a save upgrade, but there are ways that we can work around that, like an initialization script or something. So, knock on wood, Cyrodiil should work fine with existing saves. It's certainly the way. So. Here's hoping. Although, if it doesn't work out, please don't nail me to a cross for saying that.
Sounds great. So say goodbye to your Dragonborn. No. So I think basically that sounds fantastic and interesting and wonderful. But allow us to just pry a little bit to the side and ask as we come to the end of the podcast. What kind of games are you playing now, or are you playing games now, or are you fond of certain games you're looking forward to, or did you play any games outside of RPGs? Or
I hate video games. No, that was a joke.
Cool.
I've been playing. The thing is, I've developed over like the past year or so. I've developed a really terrible tendency of starting games and then like not really going anywhere with. But I've been playing, or I say playing. I've been vacillating over playing Fallout 4. I still haven't actually finished Fallout, but or not. I've been playing Dishonored 2, which I finally I had to upgrade my PC so that it wouldn't stutter and lag like hell. But I've been playing some Dishonored 2. And also, I'm one of those people who has a really bad habit of playing MMOs, which are basically just time vampires. So,
Oh God, what kind of MMOs have you been playing?
I play Guild Wars 2 and ESO. So.
Oh dear.
Oh dear, indeed. Yeah, it's not.
Are you fond of the ESO lore? Are you fond of it? Do you feel it's an immersion sim but only an MMO, or do you feel it's just the theme park?
I think it's a theme park, but I enjoy it. You know, like it isn't an in like it's not a Skyrim or an Oblivion or a Morrowind with multiplayer. It's a theme park MMO, but for what it is, I do enjoy it. As for the lore, ESO is a very mixed bag to me. It's a game like everything about ESO actually. It's a mixed bag to me. I really do enjoy it, but you can tell that it's a game that kind of got spat out the other end of development hell, and that it kind of there are decisions they make that just frustrate me on a constant basis.
Well, apparently, like it's like the best MMO out there, so they must have been doing something like right in a sense, like relatively right, if you know what I mean. Like, because many MMOs fail. So I remember WildStar. So.
Oh god. Oh yeah, the WildStar. Like the other day, they announced that they're
folding. Yeah.
It's ESO is a really good game. It's just I feel like the game just occupies a lot of really awkward middle grounds. Like the combat system is halfway between like a WoW style hotkey MMO and halfway to like a Skyrim style real time system.
Mm-hmm.
The quest, like even down to like the way that the dialogue is portrayed, like it's voice acted dialogue, but the length that it's written at, it feels more like quest text from WoW. It's kind of weird in that regard. But I do definitely enjoy it, and I do incidentally think that MMOs are probably. I don't see where they're going like in the future, because it seems like there aren't really any new ones being made with any real seriousness, and the ones.
Well, there's the Fallout MMO, I guess.
Fallout 76. It's not really an MMO. It's like it's kind of MMO-y, but it's more like a Rust kind of thing, isn't it? In terms of the persistence, but I don't know.
Well, in a sense, it's like what you actually mentioned earlier when you said it's like the proverbial quintessential Bethesda game. Like it's not really about the quest; it's about the journey over the large landscape.
Oh yeah. It's actually I said this to someone not the other day, like a few months ago, but I feel like Fallout 76 is in many ways kind of what Fallout wanted to be, but didn't. Like to me, Fallout 4 feels like it's trying to be kind of like a fast-paced open world run and gun, explore, loot, build, craft kind of game. And I feel like they kept a lot of the surface Fallout trappings to appeal to the old school fans, but to some degree I feel like Fallout 76, even though I wish that Bethesda were taking the franchise in more like a Fallout 3 New Vegas-y direction, 76 is probably going to be a better game in its own right than Fallout 4, just because it's got more it's not as constrained by trying to play for two different crowds simultaneously. So
that's the funny thing, because after Fallout 4 came out and everyone was complaining about the V4 dialogue thing, and Todd Howard was like, I take in your criticism about the dialogue, we'll fix the dialogue. I just didn't know fixing the dialogue meant getting rid of the dialogue.
I mean, full disclosure, I fully expect like Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6 to have actual dialogue systems, and if they don't, Todd Howard will be breaking my poor little heart. But 76 really does feel like it's just Fallout 4, or the things that Bethesda wanted to do with Fallout 4, with all the stuff that they didn't want to do. But
it's Fallout 4 subtitle properly this time.
Yeah.
No, but I read about the quest system. Like, I think a few people were complaining about it, but I was feeling quite zen about it. Like the way they're going to try and implement quests in Fallout 76. I'm like, yes, of course. Now they are one with themselves. It's like when it's like instead of like someone directing you to a cave, it's like if you cross near the cave, it's like there's a cave dipshit, go in it, and that's like the quest system. I'm like, yes, it's dumb, but it knows it's dumb, So yeah, well,
yeah. Here's hoping. I haven't actually pre-ordered it or anything, but I will. I hope that it's good. I will play it, and I'm cautiously optimistic. That's how I feel incidentally about Starfield Elder Scrolls 6 as well. I'm very cautiously optimistic. So
well, that pretty much generated on the spot height map looked great for Elder Scrolls 6. It tells me everything I want to know about the quest system. I know. I generally think when that Bethesda conference was on, it just looked like they generated the height map that morning. I mean,
it was a pre-rendered, like it was like a CGI cinematic, wasn't it? I'm assuming it was like outsourced to one of those like CGI cinematic houses, like the ones that did the ESO trailers.
I think it might have genuinely been the height map. I think there was stuff on top of it. Obviously, it was the recent version of the creation engine, I think. But I do think there's a lot of stuff. And when Todd Howard says it's in pre-production, it's like we just did it this morning because I think they saw the reaction to the Fallout 76 stuff, and they just had to throw in something.
Oh yeah, I think they felt that they needed to kind of reassure people that like we're not going to become the multiplayer sandbox game company now, that like they're still going to make open world RPGs. So I feel like if anything, they were giving people a roadmap for the future rather than like, here are these 2 new unannounced games that we're going to be releasing in the next 2 years. Like I would be very surprised if Starfield came out within the next earlier than like 2 years from now, and the Elder Scrolls 6, God knows, but we'll see.
In between then, you could play the next Beyond Skyrim Cyrodiil.
Yes. Well, that was probably the best way to end it. Kris, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I'm good.
Linton, anything you want to conclude us with?
No.
All right, everyone, thank you for joining us, and Linton and Kris, thank you for joining the podcast too. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.